Imagine a daughter-in-law named Alice, forced to care for her paralyzed mother-in-law. But the moment the rest of the family leaves and the house falls silent, the frail old woman rises from her bed and uncovers a $70 million secret. It turns out her paralysis was merely a brilliant ploy to trap her greedy family. You are about to witness how Alice and grandmother Eleanor form a secret alliance to exact their revenge. This story is filled with intrigue, betrayal, and the sweetest retribution. Before we dive into Chapter 1, The Suspicious Departure, don't forget to hit that like button until it turns blue, subscribe to Momo's Tales, and turn on the notification bell. Drop a comment below with your name, your city, and type present. If you're ready to seek revenge alongside Alice and Grandma Eleanor, let's begin. Alice stood at the threshold of the master bedroom, feeling the persistent chill that always seemed to blanket the sprawling Connecticut estate. A house that should have been a warm, welcoming home felt more like a graveyard for all her happiness. She stared at the king-size mahogany bed where grandmother Eleanor lay stiff and unmoving. To Alice, Eleanor had only ever been known as a burden, a convenient new excuse for her mother-in-law to belittle and demean her. Grandma Eleanor looked lifeless, her skin pale, her eyes shut tight. She was a fragile figure who had seemingly lost all her strength. Behind Alice, the air practically vibrated with the aura of dominance and malice radiating from Martha. "Listen to me carefully, Alice." Martha's voice was sharp, piercing Alice's ears and striking straight to her core like a needle injecting a toxic command. "We have to go out of town. This business trip to Chicago is extremely urgent, and we'll be gone for a full week. We don't have the time to deal with a sick old woman. You will stay here and take care of my mother. Make sure nothing happens to her, or you will be the one facing the consequences." Martha's tone made it sound as if Alice were a hired maid who had just signed an indentured servitude contract, not a devoted daughter-in-law of 5 years. Alice turned around, trying to hide the tremor of anger creeping beneath her skin. She looked at Martha, then glanced to the side where Rick, her brother-in-law, stood with that signature arrogant smirk that always made her stomach turn. "But Martha, why me? We could hire a professional private nurse or get an in-home care specialist." "It would be much safer for Grandma," Alice replied, trying to use logic and common sense. But she knew that in front of Martha, common sense was forbidden. Rick let out a short, dry, condescending laugh, the kind of laugh that always made Alice want to slap him across the face. "Professional nurses are expensive, Alice. You're way too wasteful. Besides, you're the daughter-in-law. This is your duty. A duty you should perform willingly. Didn't you always say you loved this family? Prove it." Rick placed a grotesque emphasis on the words "loved this family," as if Alice's devotion had to be proven through total sacrifice and suffering, while he spent his days lounging around and burning through his trust fund. Beside Rick stood David, Alice's husband, frozen like a wax figure melted down by his mother's demands. David looked at Alice, his eyes filled with a hidden guilt, masked behind the resignation of an overly obedient son. Alice waited. She waited for a defense, for the word no to cross her husband's lips, a word that would prove David still saw her as his wife, his partner, and not his family's servant. But that word never came. "Mom is right, honey. It's only for a week." "Pity Grandma. She needs a family's touch," David said, his voice soft and fraught with hesitation. His words weren't a defense. They were a surrender, yet another minor betrayal in a long string of them. In David's eyes, Alice saw a sickening cowardice. A cowardice that made her realize exactly how alone she was in this marriage. The disappointment washed over her like cold rain on parched earth, leaving her feeling utterly exhausted. "Fine," Alice sighed, surrendering with a voice barely above a whisper. She didn't want to argue anymore. She didn't want to waste her energy fighting a toxic trio who only wanted to see her bow her head. "I will take care of Grandma Eleanor." Martha smiled with cruel satisfaction. "Good. And remember, you are not to leave this house. We will call every day. Don't even think about stepping off this property, or you'll see what happens." Martha emphasized the words, "what happens," as if she held total control over Alice's destiny. Shortly after, the preparations for Martha and Rick's departure felt incredibly rushed and highly suspicious. They packed in record time, but before leaving, they conducted a thorough inspection of Eleanor's bedroom. They checked every corner as if they weren't leaving behind a sick relative, but a safe full of diamonds. Martha stood for a long time at the side of Eleanor's bed, staring at the old woman's peaceful, feigned sleep. Her eyes gleamed with an insatiable greed, as if she were mentally calculating the profits she was about to reap. Rick even reached down to touch Eleanor's leg, as if to confirm the limb was truly paralyzed and immovable. "Grandma looks so peaceful," Rick whispered, his tone way too sweet for someone as ruthless as him. "Yes, soon, she will be truly at peace," Martha replied in a low, chilling voice, completely unaware that Alice had heard every word. Alice shivered. A dark premonition crawled up her spine. Something wasn't right. This departure wasn't just a regular business trip. There was a massive secret hidden behind their haste and these detailed inspections. Alice felt like a prison warden or worse, an accidental witness to a dark family conspiracy. Finally, they left. Martha, Rick, and David. The roar of their luxury black SUV faded down the long driveway, breaking the suffocating silence and taking all the chaos and hypocrisy with it. Alice stood by the window, watching the vehicle until it disappeared behind the high iron gates. And the moment those gates clicked shut, she felt the most terrifying silence she had ever experienced in her life. The sprawling estate now felt like a haunted labyrinth. It was just Alice and the only other occupant. Grandmother Eleanor, the paralyzed figure lying helplessly in the master suite. The silence was so thick, Alice could hear her own heart pounding. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. 1 week. "It's just a week," she reassured herself. Alice began her duties. She went into Eleanor's room, prepared a basin of warm water, and gently sponge-bathed the old woman. Despite her anger at Martha's treatment, Alice couldn't bring herself to mistreat Eleanor. There were remnants of warmth and humanity still clinging to Alice's soul. She didn't see Eleanor as a burden, but as a victim, just like her. "Grandma, I'm going to change your water now," Alice whispered softly, moving a tray holding a glass of water. She approached Eleanor, who was still lying rigid, her eyes shut tight. Eleanor looked like she was in a deep sleep, though faint wrinkles on her forehead betrayed a subtle tension. Alice thought to herself, how miserable Grandma's fate is, spending her twilight years helpless, under the watch of children who only care about her money. Alice returned with a fresh glass of mineral water. She placed the tray on the nightstand. "It's time for your medication, Grandma." Alice leaned over, gently reaching out to touch Eleanor's shoulder to wake her. But suddenly, the impossible happened. In a split second that felt like an eternity, Eleanor's stiff, paralyzed body suddenly moved. Eleanor's eyes snapped wide open, not with the vacant stare of a helpless patient, but with a sharp, alert, and deeply calculating gaze. A gaze that made Alice's heart stop. It was the look of a 5-star general opening her eyes after playing dead on the battlefield. With movements far from paralyzed, Eleanor pushed herself up, sat straight up in bed, and swung her legs over the side. Those 2 legs, which were supposed to be dead to the world, planted themselves firmly on the hardwood floor with a soft thud that echoed in the quiet room. Alice jumped back. The glass of water slipped from her hands, crashing onto the floor with a deafening shatter. Water spilled everywhere, and the sound of breaking glass felt like the shattering of the reality Alice had believed in for years. She stumbled backward, her face turning pale. Pure terror gripped her. She looked at Eleanor as if she were staring at a ghost. "Gee, Grandma?" Alice whispered, her voice caught in her throat. Eleanor ignored the broken glass and the spilled water. She leaned forward, ensuring no one else was in the room. And then, in a hoarse but commanding whisper, she spoke. It was a whisper that carried the weight of the world, a confession that shook Alice to her core. "Help me, Alice. They are only after my $70 million trust fund." The words dropped like a bomb in the middle of the silence. $70 million. The number spun in Alice's head. It explained everything. Martha's greed, Rick's rush, and the bizarre assignment she had been given. But the most mind-blowing fact was that Grandmother Eleanor wasn't paralyzed at all. She was standing right in front of her, a brilliant, formidable, older woman who had been pulling off the most flawless theatrical performance in this house. Eleanor sprang from the bed, moved swiftly to the bedroom door, locked it, and then rushed back to Alice, who was still frozen. Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes, tears that weren't fake, but born of deep emotional agony. She grabbed Alice's hands with a strong grip, a grip displaying vitality and strength that shattered the illusion of a helpless invalid. "I know you're shocked, sweetheart," Eleanor said. Her voice now slightly louder, laced with urgency. But you have to listen to me carefully. I am not sick. I am not paralyzed. I've only been pretending. I've been suspicious of my own daughter and grandson for a long time. Martha and Rick have been trying to forge my will, trying to force me to sign shady documents. All for the estate I'm leaving behind, an estate worth $70 million. Alice took a deep breath, trying to process the barrage of information assaulting her senses. Her fear gradually morphed into awe, and then anger. She remembered how cruelly Martha treated her, and now she realized Martha was infinitely crueler to her own mother. They didn't leave you here to take care of me. They left you here to ensure I couldn't go anywhere, to ensure I remained paralyzed until they could forge all the documents and seize the money, Eleanor continued, her eyes flashing with fury. They are planning something much worse, probably a way to hasten my death while they are conveniently out of town. Martha, she said you would be at peace soon, Alice whispered, recalling the horrific phrase she had overheard. Eleanor nodded, her expression darkening. I know. I heard everything. That is why I took this massive risk. Revealing myself to you, the daughter-in-law they've constantly degraded and treated like a maid. I've watched them, and I've watched you, Alice. You are the only person in this house who still possesses a conscience. Eleanor held both of Alice's hands, looking at her with desperate hope. I need your help. We only have a week. They will return with forged documents and a wicked plan. We have to use this time to contact Mr. Harrison, my attorney, to gather evidence of their crimes. We will use my fake paralysis as bait, a trap they will never see coming. Alice closed her eyes for a moment. $70 million. A staggering amount. On one hand, she was terrified. Going up against Martha and Rick was like fighting power-hungry demons. On the other hand, a fiery sense of justice burned within her, a burning desire to avenge all the mistreatment she had endured, and above all, to protect Grandma Eleanor, who had just become her greatest ally. This charade had to continue, not to deceive, but to ensnare. Alice, the supposedly foolish and submissive daughter-in-law, was now elevated to a secret partner, the master key in this $70 million game of chess. She looked at the shattered glass on the floor, then back at Eleanor. She no longer saw a sick patient, but a fierce warrior ready for battle. She had to choose, remain a passive victim, or become the lead player in this theater of vengeance. Alice took a deep breath. Her answer was clear. She felt the cold hardwood beneath her bare feet, a sensation grounding her in the new reality she had just witnessed. Eleanor stood tall, radiating the strength of a queen, not the invalid she had been nursing. Don't waste time, Alice, Eleanor hissed. Her voice had returned to a calm, commanding mode now that her brief panic had subsided. Eleanor crouched down, an incredibly agile movement for a woman her age, and began gathering the broken glass with a nearby towel. It was the action of someone used to cleaning up messes, even amidst a world-shattering confession. We need to clean this up immediately. They cannot suspect a thing, not even a hair out of place. They might come back. Or, at the very least, they've left a spy watching the house from the outside. Alice immediately helped. Her knees were shaking, but her hands moved deftly. The paralyzing silence was now filled with Eleanor's voice as she detailed everything with shocking, cold precision. Eleanor hadn't just been pretending to be sick for a few days. She had been planning this charade for nearly a year, ever since she found confidential documents in Martha's designer bag regarding signature forgery consultations. The $70 million estate comprised private commercial real estate and corporate shares she had built from the ground-up assets she deliberately kept hidden from her greedy descendants. She knew that the moment they caught the scent of the money, their humanity would vanish. I pretended to be paralyzed and terminally ill, so they would feel they'd won. So they'd believe everything was already in the palm of their hands, Eleanor explained, her eyes reflecting deep sorrow. They will work tirelessly to forge that will, spend money, and map out their crimes. Meanwhile, I bought myself the time to formulate a strategy they'd never anticipate. I needed an inside person, someone they'd never suspect. And you, Alice, were the perfect choice, because they already view you as a worthless servant. A pang of pain hit Alice's chest hearing that validation. She was considered worthless, a puppet meant only to follow orders. But ironically, that worthless status was now her strongest weapon. Alice thought of David, her husband. Where did he fit into this dirty game? Eleanor seemed to read her mind. David. Eleanor sighed heavily. He is a coward. Not necessarily greedy, just a coward. He's terrified of his mother, terrified of losing the comfortable lifestyle she provides. He knows something is wrong, but he chooses to turn a blind eye. He doesn't know the exact details of the $70 million estate, but he's complicit in this coercive charade. I gave up hoping for him a long time ago, Alice. You need to do the same. Right now, our focus is taking down Martha and Rick and saving this legacy for justice, not cruelty. Once the last shard of glass was thrown into a hidden trash can far from sight, Eleanor led Alice to a heavy, antique mahogany wardrobe. Martha always assumed it was locked because it held Eleanor's old, moth-eaten clothes. Inside, however, Eleanor hadn't stored clothes, but a small encrypted satellite phone and a worn leather notebook. This is our only way to communicate with the outside world without being detected by the house's landline, which Martha has definitely bugged, Eleanor whispered. And this notebook contains all my passwords, bank accounts, and most importantly, Mr. Harrison's contact number. Mr. Harrison. The name was brought up again. He was the key, the turning point in this plot. Eleanor explained that Mr. Harrison was the only attorney holding the authentic will she had drafted 10 years ago, containing a highly specific disinheritance clause for anyone proven to commit fraud or attempt to embezzle her assets. Alice's first task was to call Mr. Harrison immediately, as their time was running out. With trembling hands, Alice dialed the number listed in the notebook. Every second felt like hours. Every ring felt like a hammer striking a war drum. Finally, the firm, authoritative voice of an older man answered. Eleanor took the phone and their conversation was fast, coded, and highly secretive. Harrison, it's me. The play has begun. I'm at the house. They've left. You need to act immediately. We only have a week. I need the bait. The bait was a fake document they would use to trap Martha. Mr. Harrison, who had been in on Eleanor's charade from the beginning, wasn't surprised. He understood instantly and promised to prepare a fake last will and testament amendment to present to Martha. A document that would make Martha feel like she was on top of the world, when in reality, it was a legal noose. Eleanor ended the call. She looked relieved, but exhausted. Mr. Harrison will be here in a few days. In the meantime, we have to find additional evidence. They must be keeping the forged letters or their master plan documents somewhere in this house, probably in Martha's bedroom. Just as Eleanor and Alice were strategizing how to search Martha's suite, the landline out in the grand foyer suddenly rang. It shattered the silence of the massive house with a shrill, startling tone, like an alarm warning of imminent danger. Alice's heart leaped. Panic seized her. Who would call this soon? Quick, Alice! I'm getting back into bed, Eleanor ordered. In a flash of extraordinary agility, Eleanor switched back to paralyzed mode. Her legs went stiff, her body lay rigid, her eyes snapped shut. The transformation was so flawless, so rapid, that Alice almost doubted what she had just witnessed moments prior. Alice ran out to the foyer, trying to look calm, and picked up the receiver. Hello? She asked, forcing her voice to sound flat and utterly exhausted, fitting the role of a woman worn out by nursing a sick patient. Alice! This is Martha. Why did it take you so long to pick up? What exactly are you doing? Martha's voice exploded through the receiver, dripping with suspicion and dominance. Alice took a breath and began her performance. I'm sorry, Martha. I just finished cleaning Grandma up. She's very heavy. I'm just so tired. Cleaning her up? Stop exaggerating. How is my mother? Is she still the same? Martha asked. Beneath the word same, Alice could hear the real questions. Is she still paralyzed? Is she still alive? Grandma is exactly as usual, Martha, Alice replied, keeping her tone subdued and resigned, the exact tone Martha expected from her weak daughter-in-law. Just lying there. She won't eat much. I'm worried. Worried? There's no need to overreact. Just do your job properly. Rick and I just landed in Chicago, and we have to meet our investors immediately. Listen to me very closely, Alice. We aren't entirely gone. We've hired someone to keep an eye on the estate, so don't even try to play with fire. Don't try to leave the house, and do not let any strangers inside. Understood? The phrase "we've hired someone to keep an eye on the estate" landed on Alice's ears like a physical blow. It was a stark warning amid very real panic. Martha hadn't just left Eleanor to die. She had left a spy to ensure Eleanor's paralysis remained uninterrupted and to make sure Alice didn't bolt. Alice gripped the phone tightly. Cold sweat dampened her palm. "Understood, Martha. I won't go anywhere. I will watch over Grandma," Alice replied, being careful not to speak too loudly in case the spy was lurking right outside the front doors. Martha hung up without saying goodbye, leaving only a dead dial tone. Alice put the receiver back, leaned against the wall, and closed her eyes. This theatrical game was far more dangerous and complex than she had imagined. Time wasn't their only enemy. Now, there was an invisible watcher. They had to act fast and flawlessly. Alice hurried back to Eleanor's room. Eleanor opened her eyes, looking at Alice with an inquiring gaze. Alice relayed Martha's threat about the spy. "I suspected as much," Eleanor said, her face grim. "They aren't taking any risks, but this is good. It means they are incredibly confident their plan will work, and that I will pass away soon. Now we just have to be smarter. No more casual strolls around the house. We have to exploit the time when the spy lets their guard down. Their sleeping hours will be our working hours. We start searching for Martha's documents tonight. In her suite. We need concrete proof for Mr. Harrison. Proof that will throw them in a federal prison, not just strip them of their inheritance. Their secret alliance was now solidified, bound by a shared threat and a shared goal. Justice and a $70 million empire." Alice looked at Eleanor, and Eleanor looked back. The dominant fear was gone. In its place was cold resolve and calculated precision. They had made their choice, and now they had to live under the shadow of a spy faking paralysis by day and moving like ghosts by night. 6 days remained before Martha and Rick returned with their trap. The game had just begun, and Alice knew tonight was the night of their secret raid, a night where she and Eleanor would sacrifice sleep for their future and the sweetest of revenge. The calm that draped over the estate after Martha's call wasn't a true peace. It was the quiet of a trap waiting to snap shut. Time crawled. Every second felt like a rusted second-hand scraping against Alice and Eleanor's nerves. The day was filled with exhausting acting. Alice played the obedient daughter-in-law, looking like she was on the verge of collapsing from fatigue. She occasionally whined softly on the phone when David called, ensuring she sounded thoroughly depressed. Meanwhile, Eleanor, with the prowess of an elite stage actress, maintained her stiff, paralyzed position on the bed. Even when Alice interacted with her, Eleanor would only blink or give subtle cues they had secretly established, all for the benefit of any peering eyes from outside. Alice even spotted a black sedan parked quite a distance down the street. The car only vanished as dusk approached, confirming Martha's threat. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in a vibrant orange that felt like a warning signal, the tension between the two women peaked. Tonight was the night of infiltration, the night they would sneak into the enemy's lair. According to their plan, Alice had to ensure all downstairs doors and windows were locked, giving her an excuse to roam the ground floor as if performing her final nightly chores. In reality, she was mapping escape routes and ensuring lights that should be off remained dark. Exactly at midnight, when the moon dipped behind the clouds and the darkness in the house was absolute, Alice slipped into Eleanor's room, carrying a tray of cold dinner leftovers. She locked the bedroom door from the inside, switched off the dim bedside lamp, and sat next to Eleanor. "They're asleep, Grandma. The black car hasn't been at the end of the street since 10 p.m., Alice whispered, her voice trembling with adrenaline. Eleanor nodded. "Good. They'll come back if they think everything is secure. Let's take advantage of their overconfidence." With a fluidity entirely devoid of frailty, Eleanor stood up. The legs that had been rigidly laying on the bed now stood firm, letting the darkness cloak her figure. She squeezed Alice's hand. "You must stay calm, Alice. Martha and Rick's suites are at the end of the east corridor. That is their territory. Full of traps and unseen eyes." Eleanor led the way. Her initially confident steps were now disguised as slow, deliberate movements, careful steps that required holding one's breath. The long walk down the corridor toward Martha's master suite felt like a march into hell. Every step on the antique hardwood floors had to be calculated. They moved like shadows absorbed by the dark. Alice, usually a fast walker, now had to mimic Eleanor's hyper-cautious gait, testing each floorboard with her heel first to see if it would creak. The piercing scent of lavender that Martha obsessively used grew stronger, signaling their approach to enemy territory. They arrived at Martha's heavy, intricately carved double doors. It felt like the gateway to a den of iniquity. Alice flicked on a tiny pen light she'd brought from her pocket, focusing the beam on the doorknob. "It's locked," Alice whispered. Eleanor offered a faint smile in the dark, a smile revealing a deeper knowledge of her own home. "Of course it's locked. They aren't fools. But I know their habits." Martha always left a spare key in a place she believed no one would ever touch. Eleanor reached her hand up to the top of the doorframe, feeling along the most complex part of the wood carving. Her nimble fingers found something small and cold, a brass key, the spare. The initial shock hit Alice again. Eleanor knew everything. She had truly planned this performance meticulously, right down to knowing how to dismantle her own daughter's defenses. The key turned with a loud click in the dead of night, making Alice hold her breath. They pushed the door open slowly, just enough to slip through the crack. As soon as they entered, the room felt cold and arrogant. Even in the dark, Alice could feel the excessive opulence of Martha's suite. Silk throw pillows, thick Persian rugs, and a massive vanity overflowing with expensive, imported perfumes. This was Martha's domain of power, a reflection of her boundless ego. "Look for the will, notary letters, or anything related to the properties or the bank," Eleanor ordered, moving toward a large, locked mahogany executive desk. "I'll focus on the wall safe behind the painting." Alice moved to Martha's desk. She carefully searched drawer by drawer. In the first, she found a staggering pile of credit card bills, proof of the lavish lifestyle Martha desperately wanted to maintain using Eleanor's fortune. In the second drawer, she found a passport and some gold jewelry, but no will. Meanwhile, Eleanor had already managed to open the hidden safe behind a European landscape painting. Yet again, Alice was floored. How did Eleanor know all these secrets? Eleanor quietly explained that she had intentionally installed that safe and given the code to Martha years ago as a primary test of her character. A test of conscience that Martha had spectacularly failed. "Here it is," Eleanor whispered, pulling out a thick, sealed manila envelope. Inside were several notarized pages constituting the draft of the forged will. "This is their plan. They have everything ready to be signed the second they return." Alice rushed over, and as they examined the document under the penlight, Alice's eyes widened in horror. The document didn't just name Martha and Rick as the sole beneficiaries of the $70 million estate. At the very bottom, there was a highly detailed schedule for transferring the assets, and shockingly, a schedule to cut off the electrical power and water supply to Eleanor's wing of the house, just days after the fake will was to be signed. The shock mutated into sheer terror. This wasn't just about money. This was a covert plan for premeditated murder. They intended to let Eleanor die a slow, helpless death in the dark once they secured the bag. Alice's blood boiled. Any lingering doubts vanished, replaced by a burning resolve to destroy this family. "They are absolute monsters," Alice hissed, gripping the forged draft. Suddenly, a sharp creak shattered the silence outside the bedroom door. Creak. It was the sound of a floorboard in the corridor. Very close. A sound that could only be made by a human walking extremely carefully. Alice's heart leaped into her throat. Pure, bubbling panic gripped them both. The spy? Or maybe David had suddenly woken up and gotten suspicious? "Hide it, fast!" Eleanor whispered. Her face, previously victorious, was now pale with tension. She knew that if they were caught in this room holding the fake will, the charade would end tragically, and both their lives would be in immediate danger. Alice quickly shoved the forged draft into her pajama top. Eleanor swiftly locked the mini-safe, put the spare key back in its hiding spot above the door, and closed the desk drawers. They moved in total darkness without making a sound, guided by a suddenly sharpened survival instinct. The footsteps outside drew closer, stopping right in front of Martha's door. They could hear held breath from the other side. Someone was peeking through the keyhole, or simply listening. "We have to get out, now," Eleanor hissed. But Eleanor couldn't run. The paralysis illusion had to be maintained. Even in this absolute emergency, they couldn't exit through the main door, because the person outside would see Eleanor walking. They had to escape another way. Eleanor moved to the bedroom window. It faced the backyard, overlooking a thick row of Hampton-style hedges. With great effort, Eleanor unlatched the window. "You go first, Alice. I'll follow," But I have to make it sound like I fell, Eleanor commanded. Alice didn't have time to ask questions. She knew this was the only way. She climbed out the window, dropping softly into the dense bushes below. The moment Alice cleared the sill, Eleanor threw her own body onto the floor next to Martha's bed, creating a loud thud. The sound was muffled slightly by the thick carpet, making it sound like something heavy had simply fallen in the room. The loud thud successfully startled the person behind the door. The footsteps outside hastily retreated down the hall. It seemed the spy didn't dare enter and chose instead to back away to report the strange noise. That gave them a few precious seconds. Eleanor, running on pure adrenaline, climbed out the window and dropped into the bushes with Alice. They couldn't run back inside. They had to crawl all the way back to Eleanor's ground floor suite through the dark, damp backyard. A journey that felt like miles. That night, they narrowly escaped a lethal discovery. The shock of Martha's murder plot had given them renewed energy. Alice and Eleanor slipped back into Eleanor's room, locked the window, and Eleanor climbed back into bed, resuming her role as a helpless invalid. Her face was now pale and sweaty not from acting, but from genuine physical exhaustion. Alice pulled the forged draft from her shirt. The evidence was in their hands. They had succeeded, but they knew they had to escalate the game. Martha would definitely grow suspicious of the thud and would likely call David or Rick, triggering a new wave of panic. They had to prepare a massive counterattack before Martha and Rick returned with their trap. With this evidence, Mr. Harrison could initiate his legal maneuvers, turning Martha's trap into a snare for her own neck. A chill ran down Alice's spine. But this time, it was the cold thrill of a victory that had just begun. The next morning, the air didn't carry freshness, but the thick stench of tension. After their near-fatal night escape, Alice and Eleanor knew the situation had escalated from a mere theatrical play into a full-blown war. The evidence, the forged will, and the heinous schedule to cut off Eleanor's basic needs was safely hidden. But the noise they made last night had surely tripped the enemy's alarms. And sure enough, the alarm went off. At exactly 7:00 a.m., the landline rang piercingly, shattering the fragile morning silence. Alice, who had slept for less than 2 hours, rushed to answer it. Her heart raced. She knew exactly who was on the other end. Alice! What on earth was that racket last night? Did you hear something fall in my room? Answer me honestly. Martha's voice exploded from the receiver. Her tone held a dangerous mix of rage and suspicion. The speed at which Martha called confirmed she had received a report from the invisible spy. A spy who had likely only heard the weird thud and ran off scared without daring to breach the room. Alice played her part. She made her voice sound weak, desperate, and as though she had been crying. Martha, I don't know. I think I fell asleep. But Grandma, I heard Grandma coughing so violently last night that her whole bed was shaking. I had to get up and clean everything. Alice deliberately let her sentence trail off, allowing Martha's imagination to fill the blanks with the worst-case scenario. Coughing? The bed shaking? Martha repeated, her voice softening slightly, but it was more a tone of veiled excitement than actual concern. Fine, don't overreact. Just watch her closely. Remember, don't let anyone know you're taking care of her, and do not leave her side for a single second. We will be back soon. Martha hung up abruptly, without any warm goodbyes, leaving only orders and threats. Alice put the phone down, feeling cold sweat on her back. She had survived the first crisis of the morning, but she knew Martha was now on high alert and might accelerate her plans. She hurried back to Eleanor's room. Eleanor had already resumed her paralyzed facade, her eyes shut perfectly. Though behind those eyelids, her mind was racing. She's starting to panic, Eleanor whispered once Alice locked the bedroom door. That's good. Carelessness is born from panic. Now we strike while she's frantic. The revenge strategy commenced with its most crucial step: contacting Mr. Harrison. They used the hidden satellite phone. Eleanor detailed their findings, the forged draft, and most importantly, the vile schedule to cut off her life support. Mr. Harrison was shocked. His usually calm voice trembled upon hearing the depths of Martha and Rick's cruelty. This evidence is more than enough, Eleanor, Mr. Harrison said over the encrypted line. This is attempted premeditated murder driven by sheer greed. Now, we deploy the bait. The bait was a countermove designed to lull Martha and Rick into a false sense of security, so they would willingly dive headfirst into the legal trap Mr. Harrison had prepared. The plan was for Mr. Harrison to show up at the estate in the next 2 days, carrying a fake final amendment to the last will, a document that appeared to grant Martha and Rick 100% of the assets. However, buried inside was a hidden clause, stating that signing the document in the presence of Mr. Harrison and witnesses would legally void any other wills they had prepared, and automatically activate Eleanor's true authentic will, the one containing the disinheritance clause for fraudsters. Alice listened to the plan in awe. It was a brilliant strategy, letting the enemy take a fat piece of bait that concealed a lethal hook. I will prepare the document with absolute precision, Mr. Harrison promised. You need to create a situation at the house that forces Martha and Rick to rush back immediately. Make them panic completely. Act as if Eleanor is on the brink of death. They need to arrive in such a frantic state that they don't have time to read a single word of the bait document, focusing only on the $70 million. The strategy for revenge didn't just involve brilliant legal maneuvering. It required emotional and social manipulation. Alice needed to manufacture public drama. Alice, Eleanor said, her eyes staring at the wall as if looking right through the spy outside. You have to talk to someone. Someone distant enough from the family, but deeply entrenched in Martha's social circles. Someone with a big mouth who will spread the news everywhere. We have to convince everyone that I am truly dying, and that Martha and Rick abandoned me in a pathetic state. Alice immediately thought of Mia, her best friend. Mia was a social butterfly with an extensive network among the Connecticut and Hamptons elite. Even though she didn't directly associate with the snobby Martha, any gossip passed to Mia would undoubtedly reach the right ears. Using the excuse of getting some fresh air on the secure back patio, Alice took out her personal cell phone, a device she rarely used since marrying David, and called Mia. Hey Mia, sorry to bother you, Alice said. She made her voice raspy and stressed, as if she had been crying for hours. Mia, shocked to hear Alice sounding so desperate, responded with immediate concern. Oh my God, Alice, what's wrong with your voice? You sound like you're calling from a grave. Are you okay? Alice launched into her act a masterpiece performance meant to convince Mia, and indirectly, the entire high society of the Eastern Seaboard. I don't know who else to talk to, Mia. I'm all alone in this massive house. Martha and David left me here by myself to take care of Grandma Eleanor. Grandma, her condition is terrible. Last night she was coughing up blood, and the bed was shaking violently. I had to clean everything up by myself. I'm so scared, Mia. I'm terrified Grandma is going to pass away while I'm completely alone. Alice wasn't lying about the loud noises and the shaking bed. That really happened. It was the sound of Eleanor diving to the floor in Chapter 3. But with careful wording, she crafted a horrifying narrative. Eleanor was dying. Martha and Rick abandoned her for money. And Alice, the weak daughter-in-law, was left alone to bear the burden. What? They left a dying woman behind for a business trip? That is pure evil, Alice, Mia gasped. Her voice was filled with shock and outrage. Exactly the reaction Alice wanted. I don't know what to do. I'm so exhausted. Mia, please, just pray for me and Grandma. I have to go back to nursing her. Please don't tell anyone, okay? I don't want to cause any trouble. I'm so scared Martha will be furious with me, Alice pleaded. Of course, what she really wanted was the exact opposite. She wanted Mia to broadcast this story to her entire socialite circle. Once the call ended, Alice smiled faintly. She knew that within 24 hours, the news of the dying matriarch and Martha's cruelty in abandoning her daughter-in-law would be the juiciest gossip among the elite. It would create intense moral and social pressure, forcing Martha to rush back to save face. Eleanor, who had heard parts of the conversation through the slightly ajar door, nodded in satisfaction. Incredible, Alice. You have a hidden talent. Now Martha will return not just for her wicked plans, but because she cannot let her reputation be destroyed in the eyes of society. Now, they had to force the climax. Eleanor, with astonishing calm, looked at the calendar on the wall. Martha planned to return the morning after tomorrow. She wants everything done before the weekend. We have to do one more thing to bait her into coming home tonight. What is it, Grandma? Alice asked, fully swept up in the adrenaline of their strategy. Eleanor took a deep breath. You have to create a state of emergency that Martha simply cannot ignore. Something that will force them back right now. Tonight. Panicked and rushed. Something that will let Mr. Harrison ambush them before they can even catch their breath. But what? If I say you've passed away, that's going too far. They'll get suspicious, Alice pointed out. No. Not death, Eleanor replied, her eyes glinting with a master plan. We use their greatest weakness, the fear of losing control. You need to call David, that coward of a husband, and tell him one very specific thing. Tell him you are going to call the police because you feel I am in danger and you can't take it anymore. The strategy was ruthless, but brilliant. Martha didn't fear her mother's death, but she was terrified of the police and any official involvement that would threaten her forged will scheme. David, being weak and always avoiding conflict, would instantly panic and call his mother. Alice nodded and picked up her phone. Her fingers dialed David's number. David answered with a lazy drawl, clearly enjoying his time away from the estate. Yeah, honey? What's up? Grandma's fine, right? His tone was slightly annoyed. Alice took a breath, delivering the performance of a lifetime. Her voice sounded desperate and slightly unhinged. No, David. I can't take this anymore. I don't know what your mother is doing. I found some weird things. Grandma is getting worse, and I feel like I'm in danger. If you don't come home immediately and explain everything, I am calling the police. I'm going to tell them your mother left a dying woman in my care, and I am terrified something criminal is going on. Alice hung up before David could even respond. A bold, desperate move. She walked back into Eleanor's room, trembling. Mission accomplished. The fireball had been launched. Eleanor smiled thinly. Done. Now we wait. David will panic and call Martha. Martha will lose her mind and fly back immediately to control you. They will arrive in a few hours, filled with rage and arrogance. That is the perfect time for Miss Harrison to be waiting for them with our finest bait. Rest now, Alice. We have initiated the revenge, and tonight, Martha is the one who will be panicking. Alice looked at Eleanor, feeling exhausted but immensely proud. She had transformed from an oppressed in-law into a cunning strategic ally. The revenge plot was set. The stage was prepared for the dramatic, panic-stricken arrival of Martha and Rick. The clock seemed to tick backward instead of forward. Following Alice's desperate call to David, the sprawling estate was blanketed in a silence far more terrifying than before. They knew Martha and Rick were currently speeding down the highway, fueled by rage and financial terror. This was the most critical waiting period. The window where all final preparations had to be made to welcome the panicked enemy. 2 hours. Eleanor whispered from the bed, her voice tense. They'll be here in 2 hours. That's the fastest they can make it from the airport, especially if Martha is driving like a maniac. We need to set up the fake medical emergency right now, Alice. It has to be flawless. The drama required a medical crisis severe enough to make Martha panic and ignore the fine print of the documents, but not so severe that they'd call real paramedics who could expose Eleanor's fake paralysis. Eleanor pulled several hidden supplies from under her mattress, a small bottle of glycerin to simulate excessive cold sweats, and a bit of red food coloring mixed with saliva to fake a severe pulmonary hemorrhage. Alice meticulously applied the makeup. She powdered Eleanor's face to look deathly pale, then dabbed glycerin on her forehead and temples, creating terrifyingly realistic beads of sweat. Eleanor practiced her breathing short, ragged, shallow gasps like someone whose lungs were failing. Remember, Alice, Eleanor hissed. When they walk in, you have to look absolutely shattered, but stay right by my side. Do not give them a moment to collect themselves. Just as the fake medical preparations were completed, another car pulled into the driveway without honking, gliding silently like a ghost. It was Mr. Harrison. Alice rushed to the side door to let in Eleanor's attorney, who stood holding a weathered leather briefcase containing the bait the booby-trapped fake amendment. You have to hide in the pool house, Mr. Harrison, Alice whispered, panting, her eyes scanning the driveway. Martha could arrive at any second, and she will definitely look for you later. But we don't want her knowing you're already here. The moment she enters the house, you need to make a dramatic entrance, as if you've just arrived from the city. Mr. Harrison, a sharp, calculating older gentleman, nodded silently. He glanced into the dimly lit master bedroom, saw the medical theater set up, and smiled faintly. Brilliant. Eleanor is always one step ahead. I will await your signal, Alice. Eleanor's safety is the priority. After ensuring Mr. Harrison was safely tucked away in the pool house, a place rarely checked and lacking windows facing the main driveway, Alice returned to the bedroom. Her heart was pounding. The stage was set. The lead actors and key players were in position. All that was left was the arrival of the villains. 15 minutes later, the roar of an angry engine and the screech of tires echoed from the front courtyard. Martha and Rick had arrived, rushing and boiling with fury over Alice's actions. The heavy oak front door was practically kicked open, and Martha stormed in. Her face was flushed red, looking as though she could devour anyone in her path. Behind her, Rick looked nervous, while David dragged his feet, his posture slumped, eyes filled with guilt and the dread of his mother's explosive anger. Alice, what on earth is wrong with you? Who do you think you're threatening with the police? Are you trying to ruin our reputation? Martha screamed immediately, her voice echoing off the foyer's vaulted ceilings. She didn't care about Eleanor. Her primary focus was controlling Alice and ensuring no outsiders, especially the authorities, knew about their situation. Alice, waiting in the living room, turned around with a face stained by forced tears and pure chaos. She played the role of a daughter-in-law pushed to the absolute brink of insanity. Martha, Grandma Eleanor is getting worse. I'm so scared. I'm terrified she's going to die. I didn't know what to do. I tried calling David, but he wouldn't pick up. Nonsense. She's just sleeping. She isn't going to die before the paperwork is done. Martha growled, but her words came out shakier than usual. The fear was real. The fear of losing $70 million. Martha sprinted toward the master suite. Rick followed anxiously, leaving David standing in the living room, watching the destruction of his marriage without the courage to intervene. Martha threw open the bedroom door and froze instantly. The medical theater worked flawlessly. On the bed, Eleanor lay on her side. Her pale face was drenched in cold sweat, and she was gasping for air. Every breath sounded like a desperate final effort. At the corner of her mouth was a faint red stain, the illusion of coughing up blood. That sight, combined with Alice's genuine exhaustion as she stood by the bed, was enough to make Martha lose her mind. "Oh my God! Mom! Rick, hurry! Call a doctor! Hurry!" Martha ordered. Her tone was no longer furious, but a state of total panic mixed with vile calculation. She wasn't afraid of her mother dying. She was terrified her mother would die before the forged will was signed. Rick was about to run out, but Martha yanked him back by his collar. "Wait, don't call a real doctor. They ask too many questions. We have to sort out the will first. If she dies before signing," Martha's sentence trailed off, financial terror choking her. Right at the climax of Martha's panic, as she wrestled between saving her mother or saving her money, the bedroom door opened wider, and Mr. Harrison stepped in. His entrance was dramatic, as if he had materialized out of thin air, a messenger of fate. "Martha, thank God you are back," Mr. Harrison said, his voice firm and urgent. "I am here under Eleanor's final instructions. I just arrived from the city, and I heard her condition was critical." Martha and Rick were stunned to see Mr. Harrison, the highly respected family attorney. "Mr. Harrison? How did you know?" Martha asked, her suspicion momentarily eclipsed by panic. "Eleanor called me before her condition deteriorated entirely. She knew she didn't have much time," Mr. Harrison explained, hastily popping open his leather briefcase to reveal a highly official, notarized document. "She requested that I immediately process her final will amendment. She realizes she won't make it. This is her final wish." Mr. Harrison placed the document on the nightstand right under Martha's nose. It was adorned with official seals and looked incredibly legitimate. "Martha, we do not have much time. Eleanor is too weak to hold a pen," Mr. Harrison stated, his eyes locked on Eleanor, who continued to pant heavily. "Under these circumstances, Eleanor has granted you, as her eldest daughter, full power of attorney to sign and witness this document on her behalf to expedite the process, ensuring her final wishes are fulfilled." Martha skimmed the title on the first page. It sounded like an immediate transfer of assets to her and Rick. Her eyes lit up with blinding greed. She looked at Eleanor dying on the bed. She envisioned the $70 million that could slip away at any second, and she saw the document that seemingly handed her that empire right then and there. In the chaos of Eleanor's fake medical crisis and the fear of losing the money, Martha didn't read the fine print. buried in the middle of the document. She only focused on the victory sitting right in front of her. "Fine, give it to me," Martha growled, snatching the pen from a bewildered Rick. With trembling hands, Martha hastily signed the bait document. She had no idea she had just signed a legal confession, voiding any forged wills she had prepared, and automatically activating the disinheritance clause in Eleanor's real will. Rick, equally blinded by greed, hastily scribbled his signature as a witness. David, still frozen in the doorway, watched his mother and brother sign the papers, an act he thought was fulfilling his grandmother's dying wish, not sealing a criminal conspiracy. The trap had snapped shut. Mr. Harrison smiled faintly, a victorious smile only he and Alice understood. He carefully retrieved the document. "Thank you, Martha. Eleanor's final wishes have been legally secured. Now, she can rest." Feeling she had just conquered a $70 million empire, Martha immediately turned her focus back to Alice. She marched toward her, eyes full of venom. "Now it's your turn, Alice. You will regret ever threatening us with the police. You are going to pay dearly for all of this, and you will be out of this house without a single red cent, the moment my mother is finished." Martha emphasized the word finished with a cold, cruel tone, completely unaware that her own charade had just ended, and the real show was about to begin. The master bedroom was now thick with toxic triumph. Martha stood tall beside the bed, her eyes gleaming with unchecked euphoria. She had just signed a document she believed secured her the $70 million estate, and she felt utterly unstoppable. The relief that Eleanor's horrific medical ordeal was over, and the wealth was secured, made Martha lose all restraint. Meanwhile, Rick smirked, rubbing his hands together, his mind already fantasizing about his new luxuries. "Did you see that, Alice?" Martha sneered, her voice returning to its cold dominance, but now layered in infinite arrogance. She stepped closer to Alice, who still stood there with a feigned look of despair. "You are truly useless. Only good for wiping a paralyzed woman and crying. Now that this is over, you need to get the hell out of my house. David will file for divorce immediately. A woman like you doesn't belong in a wealthy family. You've paid off your debts in servitude, now it's time for you to leave." The threat stung, but Alice absorbed it, continuing her passive role. She merely bowed her head, looking crushed by the threat of eviction and divorce. Rick chuckled. "Yeah, exactly. Pity you, Alice. You got all the dirty work, and we get all the rewards. You get tears, and we get 70 million. Amidst Martha and Rick's boastful gloating, David, who had been frozen in the doorway the entire time, looked increasingly pathetic. He watched his mother threaten his wife with divorce, watched his brother laugh at Alice's misery, and he remained entirely silent. A soulless puppet built on passivity and fear. Doubt began to creep across David's face, but he was too terrified to oppose his mother's tyranny. "Martha, I believe my business here is concluded, Mr. Harrison said calmly, his voice piercing through the arrogant atmosphere. He packed his leather briefcase, but kept his eyes fixed on Martha, a gaze now full of heavy judgment. "I expect you will respect Eleanor's final wishes." "Of course I will respect them, Mr. Harrison," Martha scoffed. Her final wish was for Rick and me to be filthy rich. "Now, could you please leave? I want to have this room sanitized and throw out everything that is no longer necessary here." Her phrase, "everything no longer necessary," clearly referred to Alice and Eleanor, whom she assumed was moments away from death. As Martha turned around, ready to bask in her victory and plan her celebrations, a small movement on the bed stopped her in her tracks. It was a very subtle shift, but to Alice, it was the ultimate signal. Eleanor opened her eyes. Her sharp gaze met Alice's, a silent confirmation. Then, the most impossible thing happened. The paralyzed grandmother Eleanor, who had been lying rigid, suddenly moved. She didn't just cough or writhe. Slowly, with astonishing core strength, Eleanor lifted her right arm, grabbed the heavy duvet covering her legs, and threw it aside. Then, with perfect posture and a straight back, Eleanor sat up on the bed. Her legs dangled over the edge, ready to touch the floor. The faces of Martha, Rick, and David instantly froze. Their expressions morphed from euphoria to pure, unadulterated shock. A shock that paralyzed their ability to speak or move. Martha's jaw dropped, her eyes bulging as if witnessing a corpse rise from the grave. The hidden truth Eleanor had been playing solo was now dramatically unveiled. Surprised, aren't we? Eleanor's voice no longer sounded weak and ragged, but powerful, clear, and ice-cold, radiating the authority of a woman who had never truly lost her power. Did you think I was dead? Did you think I was paralyzed? Did you think I couldn't see all your rot and your greed? Martha was the first to find her voice, though it came out as a high-pitched shriek filled with disbelief. This is impossible. You're crazy, Mom. This has to be her doing. Alice, you must have injected her with something. You've driven my mother insane. Martha pointed at Alice, desperately trying to deflect the blame. Rick, still in shock, tried to back his mother up. Yeah, Mom, it has to be her. She's trying to ruin our inheritance. Call the cops, Mom. Grandma's been poisoned. Eleanor let out a dry, ironic laugh. A laugh that shattered the last remnants of Martha's arrogance. I am not insane, Martha. I am simply much smarter than you ever thought. This paralysis charade was a test you failed with, spectacularly flying colors, far exceeding my worst expectations. Eleanor slid off the bed. Her feet hit the floor firmly, and she walked slowly toward Martha. Every step Eleanor took was a psychological blow to her daughter. Did you think I didn't know you were trying to forge my will? Did you think I didn't know you left my precious daughter-in-law here alone just to make sure I couldn't escape? You even hired a spy to watch me. Eleanor glared fiercely at Martha, who was now trembling visibly. You left me here so I would die slowly. That wasn't just greed, Martha. That was murderous intent. Martha shook her head rapidly. Tears pooled in her eyes, not tears of guilt, but the terrified tears of losing $70 million. No. I don't know anything. We just wanted our inheritance. Inheritance? Eleanor scoffed. An inheritance is only for those who deserve it. Suddenly, Mr. Harrison, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. It was time to present the evidence. He opened his briefcase and pulled out 2 documents. Martha, Rick, Mr. Harrison said with an intimidating, official tone, I urge you to look at this. The first document. This is the document you hastily signed moments ago. The document you assumed transferred assets to you is, in fact, a sworn legal confession that you attempted to void Eleanor's authentic will. Then, Mr. Harrison placed the second document on the table, a far more horrifying one. And this, Martha and Rick, is the draft of the forged will you prepared, which Alice found in your bedroom last night. And on the back, Mr. Harrison flipped the page. There is a detailed schedule for cutting off the electricity and water supply to Eleanor's suite. A plan you drafted to ensure Eleanor passed away in the dark, right after you signed your forged document. Martha and Rick's faces drained of all color, turning a sickly ash gray. They couldn't deny it. They knew they were the only two who possessed that vile master plan. The evidence and their hidden confessions were now attacking them with full force. Their concealed murder plot was exposed in broad daylight. David, who had been dead silent, suddenly jolted. He saw the utility cutoff schedule. He heard the words premeditated murder. He stared at his mother, Martha, whose face was now drenched in terrified sweat. David finally realized the true horror he had been avoiding. Mom, that's not true, is it? Mom, explain this. What is this? Why did you want to kill Grandma? David yelled, his voice cracking. A hero arriving far too late, only capable of showing courage after his mother was caught red-handed. Martha could only shake her head, utterly speechless. Trapped between the terror of federal law and lethal humiliation, Rick collapsed onto the floor. All his arrogance evaporated, replaced by whimpering panic. Alice looked at David. Her cowardly husband now looked like a wounded child. In David's eyes, Alice saw genuine pain and remorse. Remorse for choosing passivity. Alice knew David wasn't part of the murder conspiracy, but his inaction had given Martha the freedom to be so wicked. Eleanor turned to Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, announce to them who holds the rights to the $70 million estate. Mr. Harrison sighed, in accordance with the authentic will, which I have kept secured. Martha and Rick, because you have committed fraud, forgery, and demonstrated malicious, life-threatening intent toward Eleanor, all your inheritance rights are automatically and permanently revoked. Furthermore, Eleanor, who has fully recovered and proven your criminal intent, holds the right to redistribute those assets and pursue criminal charges against you both. The victory Martha had tasted just 5 minutes ago was now smashed into 1,000,000 pieces. The $70 million had vanished, revoked not by death, but by the colossal failure of her own charade. Martha, the drama queen, had just been brutally violently dethroned, but Eleanor knew that defeating Martha and Rick in the bedroom wasn't enough. To ensure they never rose again, to obliterate the very source of their arrogance, their social standing, the revelation had to occur on a much larger stage. Simply revoking their inheritance wasn't sufficient. "Alice," Eleanor said. She was now dressed in her finest silk gown, sitting upright on the living room sofa, as if there had never been a day she lay helpless. Her figure radiated true power. They live for prestige and fake social standing. We must destroy that foundation. We are going to host a celebration. The celebration she meant wasn't just to mark her recovery, it was the ultimate social trap. Alice, now acting as Eleanor's right hand, immediately executed the orders. Within 24 hours, invitations were rapidly dispatched via calls and exclusive text groups, announcing a miracle healing gala for grandmother Eleanor to be held at the estate that very night. Eleanor utilized her extensive network, ensuring all extended family, key business partners, and even the socialites who had heard Mia's gossip would attend. The invitations felt abrupt, dramatic, and intensely soapy, ensuring high attendance driven by sheer morbid curiosity. Martha and Rick, despite knowing their inheritance was gone and their crimes discovered, were forced to attend. They had no choice. If they were absent from the miraculous recovery gala of their own mother, grandmother, it would validate every nasty rumor already circulating. They walked into the grand ballroom with their heads held high, a display of fake arrogance, desperately trying to maintain the illusion that they were devoted heirs. "You're awfully brave to pull a stunt like this, Mom," Martha hissed at Eleanor, her eyes flashing with threats amidst the arriving guests. "You took our money. Don't destroy our reputation. You'll regret it if you do." "Reputation?" Eleanor replied with a freezing smile. "Your reputation was destroyed the moment you signed off on my murder, Martha. You came to my party. Now enjoy the show." Alice, wearing a simple yet deeply elegant dress, stood by Eleanor's side, receiving congratulations from shocked guests who couldn't believe Eleanor was standing tall. The guests whispered among themselves, confirming the rumors they had heard, and eyeing Martha and Rick with questioning glares. David stood far away in a corner, destroyed, trying to distance himself from both his mother and Alice, haunted by shame and guilt. Just as the atmosphere reached peak buzz, Eleanor took the microphone and stood on the grand staircase, a position granting her absolute authority. All whispers ceased. All eyes locked on her. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen." Eleanor's voice rang out loud and clear, devoid of any weakness. "You all came here to celebrate my miraculous recovery, but I must correct you. Tonight is not a celebration of healing, but an unveiling of the truth." Martha and Rick's faces drained of color as they realized they had walked directly into Eleanor's final public trap. Eleanor continued, "You all know I have been bedridden for nearly a year. The whole society believed I was paralyzed and helpless. That was a theatrical performance. I was never paralyzed. I merely pretended to be, in order to test the greed of my own family." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Shocked cries and hysterical whispers filled the space. Eleanor raised a hand, demanding silence. "I put on this play because my daughter, Martha, and my grandson, Rick, were plotting to embezzle my $70 million estate. They thought I was going to die. They left my devoted daughter-in-law, Alice, alone to care for me, not out of duty, but to ensure I couldn't escape." Eleanor shot a piercing glare at Martha, who was now trembling uncontrollably. "They didn't just want my money. They prepared a heinous plot. They drafted a schedule to cut off the electricity and water to my room after their forged will was signed, ensuring I would die alone in the dark." Eleanor signaled the AV staff she had hired. Suddenly, a massive projector screen lowered behind her. Displayed for all to see was the draft of the forged will Alice had found, followed immediately by the terrifying utility cutoff schedule. Irrefutable visual evidence presented to the entire high society of Connecticut. The ballroom fell into a stunned, horrified silence. The silence was broken by panicked and furious shouts from guests who felt entirely disgusted. "Look at them. These are the daughter and grandson you have admired. They are fraudsters and attempted murderers," Eleanor declared. Martha couldn't hold it in anymore. Her reputation, built over decades, was incinerated in seconds. She screamed hysterically, trying to lunge for the microphone, but was swiftly intercepted by private security guards Eleanor had stationed. "No! You're all being lied to. She's crazy. The old woman is insane. Alice planned all of this. She made my mother crazy," Martha shrieked, pointing wildly at Alice. But no one believed her. Her words were nothing but desperate flailing. As the chaos peaked, Mr. Harrison stepped forward, standing beside Eleanor. The prominent attorney was the ultimate validator of truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Harrison said, his calm voice cutting through the panic. "I am Mr. Harrison, Eleanor's attorney. I confirm the absolute truth of everything you are seeing and hearing tonight. Based on the evidence of malicious intent and forgery signed by Martha and Rick, Eleanor has officially revoked all of their inheritance rights. And not only that," his tone turned gravely serious. "On behalf of Eleanor, tonight we are officially reporting Martha and Rick to the authorities on charges of massive fraud and elder abuse involving life-threatening neglect. We apologize for the drama, but we had to clear Eleanor's name and protect her $70 million estate." The announcement of criminal charges was the final, lethal blow. Martha collapsed onto the marble floor. Her expensive designer gown was now soaked with the tears of absolute defeat and fatal humiliation. Rick stood shaking, realizing he had lost everything: his money, his freedom, and his reputation. Amidst the chaos, Alice locked eyes with David in the corner. His eyes met hers, overflowing with regret, finally realizing how evil his family was, and how extraordinary his wife truly was. Alice smiled faintly. She had won the battle not just for Eleanor's money, but for her own dignity. This public execution had been the turning point, destroying her enemies socially and prepping them for unavoidable legal doom. The buzzing crowd, previously filled with shock and hysterical whispers, shifted into a tense, suffocating atmosphere. Mere minutes after Mr. Maistake, Harrison announced the legal charges. The shrieking sirens of police cruisers echoed outside the iron gates, a sound marking the beginning of an inescapable new chapter. Martha and Rick, previously slumped on the floor, suddenly found a burst of strength not to fight the truth, but to launch one final verbal assault. Martha sprang up, her face twisted with tears and rage, directing it entirely at Alice. "This is all your fault. You manipulative bitch. You poisoned my mother's mind. You wanted all the wealth for yourself. Just you wait, Alice. I will get out of this and I will destroy you. I will make you regret the day you were born." Martha screamed, her voice hoarse with vengeance. Rick, beside her, could only let out a pathetic groan, realizing he had lost a lifetime of luxury for a moment of greed. Amidst the hysteria, Eleanor stood tall, letting the insults crash against her without a single flinch. Alice, who had spent years cowering at Martha's threats, now stared at her with a chilling calm. She had reached a point where Martha's threats sounded like nothing more than a chained dog barking. David remained frozen in his corner, watching his mother morph into a screaming monster. The grand doors swung open, and several stern police officers entered the ballroom. Their calm, professional demeanor provided a sharp contrast to Martha's theatrics. Mr. Harrison moved immediately, greeting the officers and handing them instructions in an emotionless, official tone. "Officers, I am Mr. Harrison, Eleanor's attorney. These two individuals, Martha and Rick, are being charged with massive fraud involving the forgery of a $70 million will, as well as elder abuse and life-threatening endangerment involving a plot to cut off basic utilities to Eleanor's quarters, Mr. Harrison explained, handing over the two key documents. The forged draft Alice found, and the bait document Martha had signed, legally binding her in a confession trap. As Mr. Harrison explained the evidence, Martha tried to interrupt, tried to deny, tried to bribe them, but her voice was ignored. She was no longer facing a weak daughter-in-law. She was facing the cold, undeniable wall of the law. Rick, seeing his mother dismissed, screamed hysterically. He ran toward Eleanor, falling to his knees and begging for mercy, pleading with her to drop the charges. "Grandma, please don't do this. I promise I'll change. I'll take care of you. I beg you, Grandma, have mercy on us. Don't send Mom to prison," Rick sobbed. But Eleanor only stared at him, expressionless. "You aren't begging me, Rick. You're begging the $70 million. It's too late. You chose your path," Eleanor replied, her voice like ice. The charges were official. The officers calmly read them their Miranda rights. And then came the arrests. An officer approached Martha, who immediately began thrashing wildly. "Don't touch me! I am a respected woman. I am innocent! I'm calling my lawyers! I will put all of you in jail," Martha shrieked. It was the cry of total defeat, the scream of a queen who had just been stripped of all her power and luxury. As Martha was dragged out of the ballroom, her eyes sought Alice, and she spat out her final venomous words. "You started this, Alice. You'll end up worse than me. Remember that." Rick was also escorted out, sobbing like a baby, calling out for his mother. The sight of Martha fighting and Rick crying was the perfect curtain call for their criminal charade. Outside the doors, the sirens wailed again, carrying Martha and Rick toward a cell where they would have plenty of time to reflect on their boundless greed. The massive ballroom fell silent. Only Eleanor, Alice, Mr. Harrison, and David remained. The silence felt heavy, but it was a cleansing silence. The calm after the storm. Mr. Harrison sighed in relief. "My job here is done, Eleanor. Both suspects are in custody. You are now the undisputed legal owner of the entire $70 million estate. I will handle the ensuing legal proceedings and ensure they receive the maximum sentences for their vile plot." Once Mr. Harrison left, it was just Alice and David left in the room. Eleanor sat on the sofa, watching them. David, who had been passive and cowardly this whole time, finally moved. He stumbled unsteadily toward Alice, dropping to his knees in front of her, bowing his head deeply. "Alice, honey, forgive me," David whispered, his voice breaking from suppressed sobs. "I am so ashamed. I know I'm a coward. I know I didn't defend you. I didn't know my mother would be that evil, but I let all of this happen. I let you suffer. I let Grandma be put in danger. I am a failed husband." David's confession was genuine. Alice could feel it. David wasn't the main perpetrator, but his failure to act had allowed the evil to thrive. Alice looked down at her husband. The face that used to mirror his mother's arrogance was now utterly shattered. Eleanor spoke up, her voice gentle but authoritative. "Alice, you have proven yourself. The $70 million is safe. David's fate is entirely in your hands. He is your husband, but he failed to protect you. You have every right to leave him." Alice took a deep breath. She had found justice. She had won the war against her in-laws. But now she had to make a decision about her future with David. She knelt and touched David's shoulder. "Get up, David," Alice said, her voice no longer weak, but full of strength. "I cannot forgive everything you did, and failed to do, overnight. You let your mother destroy us. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were." Alice looked at Eleanor. She couldn't continue living in this house, under the shadow of these horrific memories. "I am leaving, David. I need time. You have to prove yourself not to me, but to yourself. You have to build your own life without your mother's shadow, without dirty money. Only then can we talk about second chances." Alice made a firm decision. She didn't divorce David on the spot, but she gave him the heaviest punishment: separation, a trial by fire, and the demand to change. Alice turned her back, leaving David slumped on the floor, and walked out of the room toward Eleanor's suite. The doors to Martha and Rick's rooms were now sealed with yellow police tape, a symbol of the end of their reign. With Martha and Rick locked away, the house finally felt clean. Alice, alongside Eleanor, took a brave step toward a new life and the second chances waiting for her. The morning after the arrests of Martha and Rick, the sprawling estate felt different. The air that was once stifling and oppressive now felt clean and light. It was as if the toxic venom of hatred and greed had been vacuumed out. However, Alice knew she couldn't stay there. The walls of that mansion held too many memories of suffering and oppression. She walked into the master suite, where Eleanor was already waiting. Eleanor was dressed impeccably, glowing, looking nothing like a woman who had just executed an exhausting theatrical paralysis. "We are leaving, Alice," Eleanor stated, her eyes filled with determination. "We are leaving all the rot behind. I'll keep this estate as an asset, but we will never live here again." Eleanor looked at Alice with deep affection. "You risked everything for me. You proved that a pure conscience is far more valuable than dirty wealth. The $70 million estate is safe, and I promise you will receive the reward you deserve." Without delay, Eleanor contacted Mr. Harrison. Through a series of swift and structured legal processes, Eleanor made a decision that changed Alice's life forever. She officially designated Alice as the recipient of a massive gift for her loyalty and bravery. A gift Eleanor called Freedom Capital, a direct transfer of $50 million from her private assets into Alice's account. This wasn't an inheritance. It was an absolute gift. An acknowledgement that Alice was the only member of the family who truly had any worth. Alice was stunned. Tears spilled from her eyes not because of the staggering amount of money, but because of the validation and absolute trust Eleanor had given her. "This money is not the end, Alice," Eleanor said, squeezing Alice's hand. "It is the beginning. This is your tool to build your own life, far from anyone's shadow." A few days later, Alice and Eleanor left the old estate. David only watched their departure from a distance. Alice didn't say a word to him. She only left a short letter containing a challenge. "Prove yourself." They moved into a beautiful, modern luxury home in a quiet, upscale neighborhood, a stark contrast to the dark, intrigue-filled mansion. Alice's new life began with a rock-solid foundation: wealth, freedom, and an irreplaceable ally. Alice didn't waste the opportunity. She used a significant portion of Eleanor's capital to launch her own real estate and interior design firm, a field she had always dreamed of, but was forbidden from pursuing by Martha, who deemed it improper for a wealthy socialite's daughter-in-law. In her new office, Alice was no longer a weak in-law. She was an independent, brilliant, and authoritative woman. Her smile was genuine now. No longer forced, she found true happiness in her work and her companionship with Eleanor, who was now her chief advisor and greatest support system. Eleanor, fully recovered, enjoyed her peaceful life, seeing Alice's success as the greatest return on her sacrifice. Meanwhile, David's life in the old estate felt like hell. He was left completely alone. The massive house was empty and freezing. Echoes of Martha's cruel voice and Rick's spoiled whining haunted him. Worse, he lost his executive job at Martha's family company once the scandal broke. His entire life, built on his mother's wealth, collapsed. David became financially and spiritually bankrupt. He tried reaching out to Alice, begging to come back, but Alice gently rebuffed him. She simply repeated her challenge. A second chance would only come if David could stand on his own 2 feet, without anyone's financial help. David finally accepted his fate. He sold his last luxury sports car to pay off minor debts his mother left behind, and decided to start from the absolute bottom. David, the spoiled heir who had always lived in the lap of luxury, was now working odd jobs. He drove an Uber and eventually took a job as a barista at a local coffee shop. The work was exhausting, the pay was minimum wage, but every dollar he earned was his own, a small victory over his mother's shadow. He cut off all ties with his elite friends who only knew him as Martha's son, and even rejected calls from Martha's defense attorneys who offered him a cut to help file an appeal. David chose to bear all his regrets alone. Every day he worked was penance for his failure to protect Alice and Eleanor. His body grew leaner, his hands rough, but his eyes now held a sincerity that had been missing for years. Months passed, and Alice's business boomed. She became a highly respected businesswoman in the city. One afternoon, while having lunch with her best friend Mia brought something up. "You know, Alice," Mia said, looking at Alice with awe, "I ran into David a few days ago. He doesn't look like the old David. He was my Uber driver. He didn't try to hide it, Alice. He's working hard. He looks tired, but he looks genuine. He asked about you. He didn't ask for anything, just said he hopes you're happy." Hearing that, Alice's heart fluttered. She knew Mia wasn't lying. David had truly accepted her challenge. He was genuinely rebuilding himself. Alice decided to observe him secretly. One evening, she drove her car to the local coffee shop where David worked. She watched David serve customers with a warm smile, wipe down tables, and hustle without a single complaint. This was a new David. A David reforged by remorse. The second chance felt closer, but Alice knew the change had to be tested further. She had to ensure David hadn't just changed because he was forced to. but because he had truly found his lost self-worth. Without approaching him, Alice left an envelope containing a letter at the cafe counter, asking a waitress to give it to David. The letter contained only a few words. "Meet me at the same cafe, Saturday at 3 p.m. Come alone." Alice had opened the door, but the ball was now in David's court. This meeting would be the final test. Alice's new life was stable and prosperous. Now, she would see if David deserved a place in it. The small cafe where Alice waited felt warm and peaceful, a delightful contrast to the tense environments she was used to at the old estate. Exactly at 3:00 p.m., she saw him. David walked in, no longer wearing the designer labels he wore under his mother's shadow. Instead, he wore a simple, slightly worn casual button-down, and his hands looked calloused from hard labor. The tired lines on his face were real, but in his eyes, there was a sincere calm, a humility Alice had never seen before. David approached her table, not daring to sit until he was invited. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Alice." His voice was raspy. He no longer possessed the arrogant tone of a rich kid. "Sit down, David," Alice said, looking at him directly. She saw the fatigue on his face, but she also saw the undeniable transformation. "I've seen your efforts. I know you've been fighting hard." David sighed, bowing his head. "I deserve everything I got, Alice. Since you left, and since Mom and Rick were locked up, I lost everything. But I just realized I never actually had anything to begin with. It was all Mom's. My pride, my job, even my courage to love you, it all belonged to her." Tears welled up in David's eyes. "I'm not begging for you back because of the money. I'm begging for you back because I realize you are the only precious thing I let slip away due to my cowardice. I am so sorry, Alice. I will never make that mistake again. I don't need the 70 million. I just need this new version of myself, and the chance to prove I can be the husband you deserve." Those words, spoken by a David who now stood without the shield of wealth, struck Alice's heart. This was true confession. The second chance was no longer about money, it was about character. Alice knew the test was over. The old David was dead, and sitting in front of her was a new man she could build a life with. "You did it, David," Alice whispered, a genuine smile blooming on her lips. "You proved yourself. We will start from scratch. But remember, not from the scraps of your family's old wealth. We will start from hard work and mutual respect." They hugged a hug filled with regret, redemption, and the promise of a brighter future. Alice didn't return to the old David. She accepted the new David, tempered by adversity. Now, the fate of the antagonists had to be resolved. A few weeks later, Mr. Harrison came to see Alice and Eleanor at Alice's new office. The lawyer brought the final verdict from the trial. "The sentencing is complete," Mr. Harrison stated flatly. "Martha and Rick were found guilty of massive fraud, document forgery, and life-threatening elder neglect. They have been handed significant federal prison sentences. All remaining assets they possessed are being seized to pay restitution and massive legal fees. When they eventually get out, they will have absolutely nothing, not even a reputation." Eleanor nodded, her eyes reflecting cold justice rather than joy. They got exactly what they deserved. They wear a different crown now, a crown of suffering and lifelong regret. The 70 million is secure. Use it wisely, Alice. With the legal matters concluded, Eleanor made one final decision, cementing Alice's position. She officially appointed Alice not just as a gift recipient, but as the primary managing partner of the remaining $20 million estate. Eleanor believed only Alice possessed the integrity and intelligence to manage that wealth. Alice, the daughter-in-law once deemed useless, was now the legitimate primary heir, proving that sincerity trumps bloodlines. A new ending for Alice and David began on the right foundation. David didn't just return as a husband, but as a true partner. He utilized his new blue-collar work ethic to help run Alice's real estate firm. David learned humility, and Alice learned the power of forgiveness. They decided not to live in any massive mansions. Alice sold the old estate filled with bad memories. With the empire Eleanor and Alice now controlled, they could have bought a palace, but they chose a modest yet warmly designed modern home. They built their marriage on a new foundation: mutual respect, honesty, and total financial independence from toxic money. Grandmother Eleanor moved in with them, She found true happiness watching her son-in-law, now genuine, and her daughter-in-law, now incredibly successful, live in peace. She regained her health and found a priceless tranquility. Years later, Alice became one of the most respected real estate moguls in the state. Her story became a legend. A woman forced to nurse a paralyzed grandmother, only to find an ally, expose a $70 million conspiracy, and banish her cruel abusers. Martha and Rick became a cautionary tale behind bars. Regret was the only asset they had left. They realized, far too late, that the woman they called poor and stupid Alice was the true owner of everything they had ever desired. On the other hand, Alice, who was once only allowed to wear a crown of suffering, now stood tall. She hadn't just won $70 million. She had won her integrity, her love, and her freedom. She wore a different crown now, a crown of success built on sincerity and courage. And most importantly, she proved that the truth, even if it has to be revealed through a dramatic theatrical paralysis, will always, ultimately, reign supreme. The moral of the story: Alice, who was deemed weak and worthless, ultimately achieved true wealth and happiness because of her unwavering sincerity. Meanwhile, Martha and Rick lost everything, a $70 million fortune and their freedom due to greed and malicious intent. This story teaches us that being a good person and bravely fighting for the truth, even when it is initially agonizing and difficult, will always lead to ultimate victory and genuine peace in the end.